Alrighty. So welcome everybody to the LSTA Grants Workshop for the fiscal year 2026. So we're gonna, yeah, if you've seen this presentation last year, you may see a couple repeated things because some stuff hasn't changed, but there are a couple updates that we definitely want to highlight for this year because I'm sure y'all know the federal government has had a few changes going on. So there are some updates that we want to highlight to make sure that we've got all our ducks in a row. This is the updated LSTA subgrant timeline. So you see there's a couple changes. We've included the opening of the Hoopla applications as like a separate date this year, obviously, because everything else is opening up on the 17th of July. And also the not to be confusing, but the June 30th, 2026, the MLC Hoopla grant funding ends. That is not a deadline reminder necessarily. Like you don't have to turn in any paperwork or anything like that for that deadline, but it's just to show that while funding ends for all the other grants on May 31st, like that's the last day for expenditures, and then you have to turn in your stuff on the 10th. June 30th is when Hoopla stops. So it goes through the full month of June. All right. So that's the major difference there. Also,
Caleb, to
yes.
clarify, that's the MLC Hoopla, not if they do a separate grant.
Yes. The if you do the grant application that increases your MLC Hoopla allotment, that one is what goes through June 30th. Y'all's Hoopla is y'all's Hoopla. So that would still remain the same. So I'll go through them real quick. July 1st is when the Hoopla applications open, July 17th, which is today, and we will have those documents on the site by the end of today, if at all possible. All other applications open. The first major deadline that comes up is for professional development grants, which that's normal. Y'all are used to turning those in by October 1st. But we pushed back the Hoopla application deadline to October 1st as well, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you are trying to increase your Hoopla allotment in May or something like that, because then it's only 2 months. So it's to give y'all that time frame that where it's, you can do a little bit more with it. The first deadline for expenditures is December 31st. And so that's all of your expenditures that you've had between the opening of the grant period and the end of December. And you have until January 10th to get in that reimbursement request paperwork. Then the next major date is May 1st, which is when all of the applications close. So there will be no more applications accepted after May 1st. May 31st, the end of the same month, that is when the final deadline for all other expenditures is, that's when it is. And I also like to include the audits here because all audits are due on the 31st. Now, as I mentioned before, there is an audit extension that can go through July 31st, but we would really like to have them in by May 31st, if at all possible. Kind of like with the first expenditure deadline, and most of you are aware of this, you have until the 10th of the following month to get your reimbursement paperwork in. So the expenditures have to be completed. You have to have it shipped and you have to have received it by the 31st of May or the 31st of December for that first deadline. But then you have until the 10th to complete the paperwork for that. Like I mentioned before, June 30th is the end of the Hoopla funding or the MLC Hoopla allotment funding, or the amount that let me reword that, the increase that you put in from your LSTA funds. That is when that will end. Your Hoopla will not end on the 30th, but yeah, that's when that will end. And then of course, final evaluations are due August 29th of next year, just like this year. Just a little subtle reminder for this year too. So this is kind of like the general guidelines to keep in mind for LSTA grants. So let's get some common no's out of the way. No fines, no penalties, and no bad debts. All right. So we can't reimburse you for anything like that. So if, you do have an invoice, but it's, for some reason they're putting like a late penalty on it or something like that. We cannot reimburse anything like that. Also, no donations, no lobbying, no fundraising, and no investments. So pretty much anything where your intention is to get more money out of that situation. So like an investment, fundraising, or some sort of benefit out of it, like lobbying or something like that, that is not reimbursable. So we can't do that. Also, no entertainment, no alcohol, and no beautification. I think the alcohol is pretty self-explanatory. The uh, beautification and entertainment, they're a little bit of gray areas. So if you have an idea and you're like, well, it's going to improve the way it looks too, but the main purpose of the grant is not to, you're not planting new flower beds in the front and that's it. Something like that. Like that obviously would be beautification and we couldn't do it. But if it just so happens to also improve the way something looks, but the project idea is something different, the goal is different, then that is definitely something that we could discuss. Same thing with entertainment. If you just have a clown performing at at something, that's not reimbursable. But if someone's trying to, if they're leading a workshop or there's like some sort of professional development where they're trying to show you how to do certain things, that's where that gray area comes in. So we may be able to help with that. As always, just let us know, and we'll work with you. Um, so the next major thing, and this is when it comes to basically any kind of like federal spending for grants, it needs to be allocable, necessary, and reasonable. So allocable, what does that mean? Allocable means it can be officially assigned to the grant. All right, this is something that is actually it is something that can be assigned to the grant and it is allowable according to federal regulations. All right. So it's not, like we mentioned before, it's not lobbying. There's no alcohol. It's following the rules that should be there. All right. Now, necessary is also a key part of it. It can't just be something that kind of hangs off to the side that, we may use it, we may not, we don't know. No, it needs to be something that is actually a part of the project. And then again, reasonable. So reasonable, that's a little bit grayer. And if you have justifications and you can find a way to be like, no, this is necessary for the project. This is something, it does seem like it's excessive, but this is why we need it, then that's something that we can work with. But for instance, if you're buying two STEM toys and you're like, let's buy like a whole, like, I don't know, shipping container full of AA batteries just in case. It's like, no, that's obviously not reasonable. So it would be enough to get through the project or enough batteries to kind of get you through that grant period. And then from that point on, we can, possibly do more. So each grant, now this is very important. So each grant should have its own file with associated documentation included. So on your award letters, it gives you, depending on the grant, but most of them use the same one. It gives you a list of all of the things that need to be included with that file. And it specifically says these need to be included with your LSTA file. So make sure you do that. And also, because we're dealing with federal money and we are a pass-through entity, which is a state agency, just keep everything. Keep the emails, keep the receipts, keep the old receipts, keep the outdated quotes, keep it. Just keep it and throw it in that file. Try to, maybe organize it a little bit. But, it's try to keep everything that you can with it. Correspondences, anything like that. Also, be sure you're following local policies in addition to the federal and state regulations and laws. This you will probably hear me say another 3 or 4 times. Again, last year we kind of saw what, the federal government can change a couple things, and there are plenty of trickle-down effects with that. So making sure that you are following your local policies and state regulations in addition to the federal regulations is important. I understand it's federal money, but it still is subject to state and local laws. All right, so we need to make sure that we do that. Also, like I said, check the LSTA manual for more information. It should have most everything that you need to know. It should. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out. And like I said, we've done a little bit of an update to it, to the format. We've went in, we've added a few sections that are necessary. We fleshed out a few things. We tried to make it a little bit more manageable this year, just in case. So be sure when we do have that on the site to make sure and read through that. Any questions before I move on? Okay. All right, so we're going to go through, there's going to be a couple slides of updates to federal regulations. Now, this may not be super fun, but it also may, disqualify some reimbursements. So it might be fun to know just in case. So the first thing is mandatory disclosures has been added or has been, expanded on. So an applicant, recipient, or subrecipient of a federal award must promptly disclose whenever in connection with the federal award, including any activities or subawards thereunder, it has credible evidence of the commission of a violation of federal criminal law involving fraud, conflict of interest, bribery, or gratuity violations. I will be going into a little bit more detail about the conflict of interest. There's another thing that needs to be added to that. But that should be self-explanatory. Okay. So if you or one of your staff members or anyone working with the grant at all feel that there might be something fishy going on, they need to, that needs to be addressed. There's also whistleblower protections, which kind of goes hand in hand. An employee of a recipient or subrecipient must not be discharged, demoted, or otherwise discriminated against as a reprisal for disclosing to a person or body information that the employee reasonably believes is evidence of gross mismanagement of a federal contract or grant, a gross waste of federal funds, an abuse of authority relating to a federal contract or grant, a substantial and specific danger to public health and safety, or a violation of law, rule, or regulation related to a federal contract, including the competition for or negotiation of a contract or grant. The recipient and subrecipient must inform their employees in writing of employee whistleblower rights and protections. So that part is important. They need to, anyone working with the grant, typically this might be a good policy to have, generally, but also for the grant specifically, they must be informed in writing that they have whistleblower rights and protections.
And Caleb, I'd like to comment on this one just a little
Yes.
bit. So what this is saying is that you must inform all of your employees in writing of whistleblower rights and protections. So what we do here is we have an annual letter that goes out with our internal controls that basically says some of the things that we require on an annual basis, like you have to have a purchase order, and we give them like the state auditor's line to report fraud, if you would say. And then so we also added a section that says this is informing you of your whistleblower protections, and we reference the section of code from the federal regs. And that is something annually that is signed by all of our employees. And then that is something that is signed for all new employees.
All right. So, like I said, we're going to flesh out the conflicts of interest a little bit. Basically, in short, the language was updated for procurement standards to include board members in addition to employees. So the way that it reads now is no employee, officer, agent, or board member with a real or apparent conflict of interest may participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by the federal award. All right. So it's same rule, but now they've explicitly included board members as well as employees and other staff. So another update, Internal controls. Now, some of you, because we've already been doing audits this year and those had to have that kind of requirement, we've already talked about it a little bit, and our losing my words, our template that we send you for the internal controls letter, if you have to do it yourself, that is already included there. But the changes are library systems must establish, document, and maintain internal controls. So obviously, we would hope that you were documenting these things before, but 2CFR has updated it to explicitly say that they must be documented. Um, so yes, also the language on the internal controls letters. Now your auditors should be aware of this, and your auditor should be doing this for you, but you may want to double check just in case. The language on the the internal controls letters was updated to include cybersecurity and other measures to safeguard personal information. So this is really about making sure that you have some sort of system in place to protect people's information digitally. All right, so the next one, executive orders. All right, we've been having fun with those lately. So a library system should be aware of the rules in the grant agreement, local policies, state regulations, federal regulations, and applicable executive orders. So 2CFR updated so that that is in there as well. And we try to include what we can in the manual, but as y'all have seen, executive orders can be implemented, amended, and revoked, and Lord knows what else with very little notice. All right, so sometimes those things might change, and we can't really go into the manual every 20 minutes that there's like a ruling and change that kind of stuff. So what it's going to be important that y'all are aware of executive orders that may affect that. All right, so new signature requirements. So now what they want us to do is they want us to have you sign off on and those of you who've done the Hoopla application, you've seen this. The applications now require a signature. And because they're getting a little strict about signatures, we may be a little bit pickier about the signatures that we accept. So just to, go over what's on the slide, signatures are now required on applications as well as all other forms that they were previously required on. The certifications have been updated to reflect new federal regulations, so be sure that you read them. It's not going to be the same as it was last year. Now, obviously, the same requirements are still in there as last year, but there has been an update to how that language reads and what you're signing off on. And, it's always good to know what you're putting your name to. Digital signatures, they are acceptable. However, they will need to be time stamped in order to be accepted. So now, obviously, a physical signature we can obviously still accept. So if you're signing it, if you're writing your signature, we can do that. But if you're doing one of those automatic, like where it generates the text, in a swirly way, and then that's the signature that you're using, we need like a timestamp or something on there. Adobe does that. I'm pretty sure most programs can do something like that and put a little timestamp on it, and it says who's signing it, and when it was signed. And those will be required now. I think that's pretty straightforward. Maybe a little aggravating, but it's a little straightforward. All right, so I'm going to give you an example document to look at. And like I did last year, I'm going to have you look at it, and I want you to tell me what you think is wrong with it. So we had our lovely purchasing chief, Bobby, mock this up. And so one thing to keep in mind whenever you try to figure it out is, let's assume that the entire amount is being requested for reimbursement. All right, so take just a second, see let's see, some folks already know. Y'all are already on top of it. All right, yeah, a $20 margarita better be pretty good. So obviously alcohol, can't do the alcohol. And then I saw a lot of people mention the tax. Obviously we can't do sales tax, especially if it's explicitly mentioned in that way. I also saw before I lose it. Let's see. All right, so food. Food is definitely allowable. All right, so that is allowable. Alcohol is not, sales tax is not. And D pointed out that, and this is a good one, the date is not within the grant window. So I guess if we're going really, really technically, none of this is reimbursable because it's outside of the grant period. It's after May 31st. But let's pretend like that wasn't a factor. Um, the and Naomi is the one who found the third major one, which is too much tip. So if you do the math, which I don't have a calculator in front of me, but if you do the math there, that exceeds the 20% that is allowed for that tip. Um, so that is another major thing. What someone brought something else. Okay, Shamika, it being paid by credit card, that is okay. That would be okay. It can be done by a credit card. But one thing to keep in mind is obviously if you're using the library card or the library, you're using your official like purchasing card for for the library, you do not want to you want to be extra careful about about sales tax and stuff like that.
Um, Heather, can I make a couple of comments on this?
Yes.
So let's the food part of it. So food gets just a little bit complicated because from a concept of it, if you are offering food at an event, you need extra backup that goes with it. So from a state standpoint, what we have is if I have this invoice right here, and really it says sales receipt, if I'm looking at it, I would want it to say invoice, that it's invoicing me, right? Because we sort of talk about that a little bit in the manual that it should be an actual invoice. So for when questionable, it would be best if it said invoice on it. I'll also want to have behind it a list of attendees that go with it who was actually at this event, right? I also want to have my agenda, what actually was covered to make sure what was on the agenda was professional development and LSTA eligible. I would also have on there was one other piece and I forgot what it was. Oh, I want the time before and after the meeting. So I'm sitting here and I have a sandwich tray and I've got 20 people in this event. I'm going to start my meeting at 11 o'clock and it's going to be over at 12:30. That's not something that we're going to pay with LSTA funds. You should have an appropriate time before that lunch is going to be served. You should have an appropriate time after lunch is be served, and then you should have a working lunch that goes with it. I will also make a comment that we have seen this a lot lately with the restaurants and what we call our state procurement card, which is the type of procurement card you all should be using too, where they want to charge a fee for utilizing our procurement cards or just using cards in general. That is not an allowable expense. It's not even allowable on your procurement card side either. So that 3% that usually is what you see is not an allowable since it's paid and it not should be an expense that you all paid. I will comment on interesting like what Shamika Connor said on that payment method of credit. It does become a question as to can you have a credit as the library system? But in this instance, if you were paying by your credit card, which would be the state procurement card, then that would be an allowable and could be on your invoice. Any questions?
Righty. All right, so now moving on to the non-professional development grants. So This is for everything else, basically. This is your hoopla. This is your collection development. This is technology upgrades. This is special programs. This is if you want to try out a new service, if you want to, use LSTA funds towards these things, this is where you do this. So some things to keep in mind. So the first thing that you need to do, good. All right, so the first thing that we need to be looking at whenever it comes to LSTA subgrant, the general LSTA subgrants, is you think of a project, gather the required information, so the kinds of stuff that you're going to be using on your like the description of the project, your needs assessment, things like that, then apply. All right. So if you're having trouble or not sure about a project's allowability, please contact us and we will help you. All right. So something that gets brought up from time to time is why do the different focal areas of the project matter? Because you'll submit something and I'm like, well, technically that might work better as an information access, or technically that might be more of a lifelong learning. It does seem a little arbitrary, especially I'm sure filling it out. But when I'm making those decisions, or whenever we're like trying to determine which one's which, we're really trying to keep in mind how we have to report this back to IMLS. We're trying to make sure that this fits, or that the way that we're going to, or what we're going to be looking at in those, final evaluations, what information we're going to want to have from this project in order to report that back to IMLS as something that, to justify our funding, all this kind of stuff, and more accurately represent what we're trying to do. Another big question that comes up a lot is, when do I need to submit a quote? All right. So quotes this year, the threshold for needing a quote as far as federal funding. All right. So let's specify, as far as federal funding, the threshold for needing a quote is now $10,000. So that affects what we have to contact IMLS and ask permission for. So, for instance, and because the LSTA award amount this year doesn't exceed that, it's 7,500, so it's not going to hit the 10. You more than likely, 99 times out of 10, you're probably not going to need a quote. But for instance, if you're using the LSTA funds to partially cover something that does exceed $10,000, an individual item that exceeds $10,000, then we will still need a quote. We will still need to be able to request that permission from IMLS. State law, however, has not changed that threshold. I think they've talked about it, but they have not changed it yet. So we've got two different numbers we're working with. State law requires that you have two quotes for any individual item that's over $5,000. So we may request to see that quote, but as far as permission from IMLS, we do not necessarily need that. We need one quote to submit to IMLS for the LSTA grant, but according to state law, y'all need to have the two for anything that's over 5,000. So it used to be a little bit easier because they were both, sitting at 5,000. So you just kind of knew if it hit 5,000, you've got questions to ask. But yes. So some more stuff. When do I need to add IMLS and MLC logos? Um, let's just be safe and say pretty much whenever you can. So if it is a reasonable thing to add to any sort of, any sort of like project that you're doing, please do so. Logos, pretty self-explanatory. However, I did update that section in the manual, and that's the phrase that is recommended that you put on things that, where you can put a little phrase is also included in there now. But if you have any questions, just let us know. So something that happens a good little bit is people will request the full amount for a project, and then they find out that things are cheaper. Well, sometimes we find out they're more expensive, but for the most part, if we find out that we're not able to buy as many things as we thought we were, we seem like we're going to have too much money. That doesn't exist. So you just let us know. We will find a way to include something. This is one of the reasons that we ask you on your applications to include in that supplies and materials and small equipment section, or whichever section you're filling out, but typically it's that section. We ask that you put in there other necessary items needed to complete the project. So that opens up the door to a potential for, okay, you're doing a tech upgrade. If you need a few extra cords, if you need a few extra chargers or something like that, and you have the funds, that's what that's there for. All right. So always, talk with us and we can help you find a way to use that money if need be. So something that also happens every blue moon is they want to change the budget amounts on the application, or the needs that you find further down the line in the project change a little. So that's fine. But if there's more 10% or more of the budget is being reassigned to a different section, then we have to get, or you have to ask explicit permission from us. We need to have that documented if you're going to change those budget sections from 10% or more. That Another big thing that we want to make sure that we cover is telecommunication equipment and services. So there is a list of vendors that we are not allowed, or of companies that we are not allowed to purchase from as government entities. Uh, that is usually, as far as federal regulations, that can be found here at that 2 CFR 200, 216. That tells you that. But one thing to keep in mind is that local policies and state law may have more to that. All right. So again, we have to follow all of the laws, not just whichever one applies the best. So if you are unsure, or if you think that they're not on that federal list, you still need to check and make sure that it is not unallowable as far as state or local policy goes. Something additional to keep in mind with this is vendors may not be aware of this. Especially if your vendors are typically work or people who you're contracting to kind of consult and put together your tech needs and all this kind of stuff. You may run into a situation where they aren't aware of this because they typically work with the private sector, where a lot of those restrictions don't apply. They need to be made aware in case they don't know, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you have purchased a lot of equipment or a lot of telecommunication equipment or some services, or you enter in a contract that you are liable to pay, but then we can't reimburse that, or it's illegal to pay for those sorts of things with state funds as well. So that's the kind of pickle you want to keep yourself out of, if at all possible. So when you're talking to your consultant, or like a consultant for this type of project, or your vendor, please make sure that they're aware of what is and isn't allowable to be purchased by your system. So Hoopla, we've sent a couple emails about it. If you have specific questions, please let me know. But this one is a little different from most of the other ones. Also because the deadline has changed, we've moved it back to October 1st to kind of be more in line with, we want to make sure that you have multiple months that you can apply towards it. But please contact us before you can submit the application if you would like, of course, and then we'll either say yeah, no, maybe. But if you want to contact us before and just check to see if the amount that you're requesting is going to be used up by your system, because the one thing that we want to avoid is just dumping all the money in there and saying we hope you spend it, and then at the end of the month it doesn't roll over. So that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid any kind of like waste of that money in that way. Kind of like the professional development application. This is just a one-page application. It's pretty self-explanatory, and like on all the other applications we've seen so far, there will be a new signature requirement for that. And as far as this funding goes, this one will require probably the least amount of paperwork down the road as far as, what we need for reimbursement because it's not reimbursement based. So it is money that we move from, LSTA to our hoopla allotment that we give y'all. And so it's a little less involved as far as the process goes. There still will be I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure there's still going to need to be a final evaluation filled out, like that kind of stuff. But there won't be any reimbursement paperwork that's involved with that one. All right, so the regular LSTA application, this one, the deadline is way further back. It is in May. To give y'all time, if especially that deadline is also helpful if you have money left over and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to like spend. I don't know what I'm going to use this for, and then you finally find something later down the road that you can do. That's why that deadline's a little bit further back. The focal area on this one, that's going to be a little bit more important because it's the only one that has it. But that focal area, like I said before, that really helps us when it comes to how we report, the money that was spent and justifying future funding. Um, One thing to keep in mind with these is project evaluations and project goals should be complementary to one another and include a quantifiable goal whenever possible. So, and it may seem like there's a lot of situations where there's no way to do a quantifiable goal, but that is typically not the case. Even, for collection development, we're looking at circulation data. We're looking at things like that. Like there's always a way to kind of factor in a numerical aspect to it. We want to see an overall increase in satisfaction when it comes to these. We got to, so you do surveys, you do something like that. There's always a way to do it, and those are important, especially towards the end of the project whenever we're doing our evaluation. All right, so I think I already did this one. Oh no, okay, I stopped in the middle of it. So LSTA reimbursement request forms. So I didn't, oh, I messed up. I didn't put it there. So it's supposed to be, these are due January 10th and June 10th. So we used to do every now and then it was only the professional development, but now all the grants, there's going to be that two dates to remember where it's that first half of the year that needs to be reimbursed, and then it's the second half of the year that needs to be reimbursed. Um, so these, so as far as like, and this is what it says in the manual, but accompanying documentation should be an invoice or receipt containing at a minimum the date of purchase or invoice date, the store and vendor name, and an itemized list of goods and service purchased. Final evaluation for LSTA grants, it's pretty much the same as it always has been. So the deadline is August 29th. And this, like the other one, just make sure that if your project, even if you have local funds that have been spent, even if it wasn't in the original budget, even if, this is meant to represent what was actually spent, not necessarily what was on the application. Now, hopefully it's the same or it hasn't changed very much, but it is meant to be an accurate reflection of the expenses that you incurred and what was reimbursed and what wasn't. Um, yes. All right. So if y'all don't have any questions about the regular LSTA grants, then we're gonna do the same thing as we did before, where we look at, we look at an example and we see if we can figure out what's wrong with it. And I'll try to kind of go quick with it. Some of y'all might recognize this one as well. So like with the last one, let's assume that the entire amount is being requested for reimbursement. This one has it has three things, but one of them is it's not really something that would stop the reimbursement, but it's a question. It's like why? Why do you need this specific thing, or why do you need this much of this specific thing? Yes, I'm seeing a lot of tax. All right, so sales tax, yes, that does not need to be added. Batteries. Why so many batteries? Exactly, Tamara. So why so many batteries? Whenever, if we look now, I'm sure that it's micro print at this point, but down here you see it says solar robot kit to assembly AAA battery. Okay, so if I remember right, it says something about it being potentially included with it. So, but I understand we want to have some extra batteries just in case. Um, so the 2 pack of AAA batteries makes sense. It makes sense. Like you said, why so many? Four. Why do you need 4 2 packs of AAA batteries for something that only takes 2 AAA batteries? Or what does it say? Mm, Yeah, I think it takes two. No, just one. So yeah, that's a lot of batteries. That's probably going to go. The idea, think of it this way: you don't want to basically stock up on something that's going to go well past the grant period. Like you don't need it for that project technically, even if you have the item after the grant period is over. Now, I'm not saying like try to calculate, oh, how long would the battery last? It's like no, don't do all that. But if it looks like it's an excessive amount of like ink or something like that that's in there, that's something that we want to do. Hey, David, you found something else. All right, so no vendor name. We don't know where you're getting this from. So we may ask for a new invoice in this situation. Exactly. Marianne, that's what we're trying to avoid. If it looks like someone is basically just trying to restock their cabinets, then we have to kind of say, is that really a part? Is that necessary for the project? That's where that wording comes into play. Necessary. Um, mhm. Okay, yes, Philip. So if you now it's obviously going to depend on the project or depend on the item that's using the batteries. If you know that you're going to burn through these batteries, and then that makes sense. But like you also said, the C batteries, that doesn't make sense because that's not required for this item. Now, it may be required for another item, but unless that is being included with the project, unless that's being included with that reimbursement, then it doesn't make much sense. So I think y'all pointed out most everything. The lack of name, yeah. So we don't know who you bought it from. The sales tax is being included, and that can't be included. Uh-oh. The 4 pack of C batteries, that makes no sense because we don't have any other documentation that is showing what you're going to be using that for. It's kind of like, for instance, it's a lot of time, it's something a little more practical, like printer ink. Okay. You buy a printer and you get multiple types of ink because you're like, oh, well, I mean, I'm just, we've got this other printer and we just figured it's like, that's not for that project. So like it isn't technically allowable. Now, if you want a project where that could be included, then we may be able to work a way into kind of recategorizing the grant or rewording the grant in a way that it makes sense for you to have those supplies. But typically that is not meant for, resupplying anything. Um, Yes, and I put a little yellow arrow there because, like Philip said, that might be a perfectly reasonable amount of batteries. But also, we may ask because that's a lot of batteries. You know, it's so now I'm going to go teacher mode on you, and we're gonna have a little quiz. So, put your answers in the chat, scream them out loud. However you want to do it. But we're gonna test your knowledge. We're gonna see what you remember from this presentation. Or what you don't. So, number one, how many quotes are required by state law if purchasing items and commodities over 5,000? Yep. Two. Now, how many of these are required for LSTA, like to submit to LSTA or to IMLS for approval? Exactly, just the one quote. But we may ask to see it. We may, like there's always going to be a situation where we're trying to make sure that, state laws are being covered as well. All right. True or false? Furniture is allowable under certain circumstances. It's a little bit of a leading thing there at the end. True. Typically though, we see that furniture on there, we're going to ask questions. We're going to say, why do you need a chair for that? What kind of chair is it? Can you send us the specs for it? It's like, and it's also a matter of how much of the budget is being used for this. If your project is, we need new chairs for all of our computer desk. No, that the primary purpose of that is buying furniture, which is not, that's not what the LST funds are meant to be used for. Now, if you are doing a huge, like we're going to do children's programming all summer, we're going to do this, a bunch of crafting, like you need those supplies. We're not going to ask you to keep them in a garbage bag in the corner of the room. If you need like a little shelf to put them on or something like that, that's also perfectly reasonable. But it cannot be the majority of the funding. You can't say, well, we're doing a bunch of crafting projects and you spend $10 on, crayons and, construction paper, and then there's like a $2,000 cabinet that you're buying. It's like, no, like we can't do that. Can't do that. All right. So 3. This is a little technical. Which of these is more likely to be considered a lifelong learning subgrant?
Okay,
Okay.
Caleb, let's take
Yeah.
that, pull it back to the intents that go with it.
Okay.
So if we're looking at lifelong learning, we're saying improve users' knowledge or abilities beyond basic access to information. And then that is improve users' formal education or improve users' general knowledge and skills.
Oh, I love it. I'm getting a mix of answers. All right. So new materials to update the children's collection. A. I'm going to say no on that one. Why? Because lifelong learning, when you think of lifelong learning, what you want to be thinking of is usually, I'm not thinking of an example. I'm sure there will be, but I'm not thinking of any example that doesn't involve some sort of instruction. All right. It is something that it is a class that is being led. It is something along those lines. So just adding new materials to the children's collection, that would be information access. You're just making those materials available for them to use, but you are not explicitly like instructing anyone. So B, a weekly gardening class for kids. Does this involve instruction? Absolutely. So a weekly gardening class for kids is the one that would be considered lifelong learning. 2 new public access computers reserved for online students. Tangentially, it's related to instruction, but the library is not instructing anyone. You didn't have someone come in, a speaker come in and lead a class. You didn't lead a senior, a class for computer use for seniors. It didn't involve any of that stuff. So this would be an institutional capacity. You're improving what the library, like technology wise, can do. Um, and then converting an unused meeting room to a teen room. This also wouldn't be considered lifelong learning because there's no instruction involved. There's no learning outside of what is being made available. This one, again, would also be institutional capacity because you're improving the operations of the library, or you're expanding what the library is capable of doing, not necessarily explicitly instructing people. Does that make sense? I know that one's a little technical, but hopefully that makes sense. Any questions about that one? No. Okay. So 4, which one of these is most likely to fall under services or contractual? A, B, C, or D? A mascot hired for summer reading entertainment. B, catering staff's hourly wages for a fundraising event. C, hardware installation done by MLC staff. Or D, local quilting expert hired to instruct a class. So which one of those would be considered services or contractual? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of D. All right. The local quilting expert hired to instruct a class, that is the correct answer because you are contracting with this person to lead a class. Hardware installation done by MLC staff. Installation would be considered services and contractual. Why is this one not applicable to this situation? Can you think of why? It might be the last part of the sentence.
If it was done by an outside company, it would be contractual.
Exactly.
We can't pay MLC.
I mean, you can, but just, don't
Not
don't
supposed to.
Yeah, you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to. No. And if they're asking for money, then we need to be talking about something else. But yeah, no. MLC staff does not charge for installation services, so there's no need for any sort of reimbursement in that way. Now you may include that MLC will help with installation as far as like on the application, because that clarifies how it's going to be installed and all this kind of stuff. But as far as like including it as far as one of the charges or in the budget, that doesn't make sense. Exactly. Only chocolate and booze. Yeah. So if MLC asks for money, we use the whistleblower clause. That would be, I think, mandatory disclosures. And then whoever disclosed it would then need to make sure that they are protected under the whistleblower clause. So yes, good use of that. Also, catering staff's hourly wages for a fundraising event. So this one's a little complicated. Threw it in here on purpose. Catering staff's hourly wages. So let's stop there. Let's not add the last part. That is services and contractual. All right. Now, whether or not we could pay for it with the grant or whether we would accept that, it's a little iffy. But because it's for a fundraising event, you cannot get reimbursed for expenses that are incurred as a result of a fundraising event. That is not, because what you're doing is you're seeking money in response after spending that money. So getting reimbursed for that, we can't do that according to federal law. And then a mascot hired for summer reading entertainment. That last word should be the clue. All right. Entertainment is not reimbursable. Now, a mascot that reads to the kids and, asks questions, there's an educational aspect to it, that would be allowable. All right. But if it's just they're there to go rah, rah, hooray as soon as the kids meet their goals, no, that would not reimbursable. True or false? All right. Receipts are no longer required for any food purchases. True or false? Yes. False. All right. So which one do we need receipts for? Travel meals. So like food that, would be incurred like whenever you go to a conference or something like that, or catering orders for an in-house event. Which one would we need them for? Yes, catering every time. So catering, we will be asking for that. No tax on it. The tip can go up to 20%. You can do that kind of stuff, but it is where we will need that documentation for reimbursement. All right. These are some of the newer ones. So what has been added to internal controls that are to be included with your audits? Cybersecurity and other measures to safeguard information, mandatory disclosures, compliance with executive orders, or D, whistleblower protections. Okay. If this one feels tricky, it's because it's meant to be a little tricky. Um, okay. I like that you're thinking all of the above. I like that you're thinking that, but that's not correct. So specifically for internal controls, for those internal control letters, it's A. The only thing that is explicitly needing to be mentioned of these items here is the cybersecurity and other measures to safeguard information. All right, as far as like making sure that you're digitally being diligent about protecting people's information as well. Mandatory disclosures, compliance with executive orders, and whistleblower protections, those are all things that you need to be keeping in mind, laws that you need to be following, for as far as the whistleblower protections, they need to be provided that in writing, but none of that really comes into play with the internal controls as far as like the letters that need to be done.
I will comment on
Um,
that just to say that it doesn't say it has to be done with the letters. The specific 2 CFR 200 talks about adding the cybersecurity and other measures, but as we've said, it's not going to hurt you to add any of this stuff, to your internal controls as to what you're doing and how you're complying with the laws and regulations. And I will say on the whistleblower protection, we actually put that on when we send out our annual letter that you signed, that is part of our internal controls, because it is an easy way to inform all of your employees at the same time, because you're already doing something for internal controls. Might as well include that anyway.
Caleb, can we go back to the receipt, the food receipt deal? So with our internal controls, we require receipts if we're reimbursing.
mhm.
So if they go on, to a training, or if they go to somewhere and we are providing them meals on their travel, internally, we require them to submit a receipt. So you're saying that LSTA is not requiring that?
So for travel meals, no, we do not require that. Now, if there's something fishy, if it seems like, like, wait, why is this happening? Then we may ask for some further documentation. But as far as like requiring receipts for every single travel meal expense, no, we do not require that. I personally, I think it is good policy that y'all keep track of that, because like I said, there may be a situation in which we have to do a little bit more digging than what we may like to, but to verify a couple things. But as far as what needs to be submitted for reimbursement, we do not require that unless it is an in-house training catering order or something like that.
So Mary Ann, will you comment a little bit when you say you require receipts? So like if you have someone go in, you're requiring them to have like a breakfast, lunch, dinner receipt, and that's what you're deciding what you pay them. Is that what you're saying? You're on mute, Mary Ann. Mary Ann, unmute yourself.
I apologize. I know that, the per diem thing, and it's a overall deal and that kind of stuff, but I require, before they travel, they have to submit a request so that I know that we got the funds to reimburse them or pay for it or whatever.
Correct.
And
yeah.
so in our travel deal, we just include all that and they have to fill that out. And then if whatever they spend on it, they have to prove, this is what I spent and this is what we're going to reimburse you. That's how we do that. And then we make them sign the receipt when they submit it. Okay. So I got that clear now.
Okay, so I'll just go into that just a little bit. So several years back, I think last year was the first year we didn't require the receipts for the food. From a federal standpoint, it's not required. If you actually go and read DFA's handbook on the travel handbook, it's not required. They do recommend it, but it's not required. But what we got to look into is from an agency standpoint, Right now, it is not in our policies and procedures that we require individual employees to do that. So we didn't feel like it was fair to you all to have to require you all to do it if we didn't require our own employees to do it. And plus, in addition to that, it was taking a significant amount of work for the professional development for the reimbursement, because it was then looking at it, okay, oh no, well, I got to take that out. They had an alcohol there. I got to take that one out of it. Oh, you got to submit this back. Oh, it was this. Oh, it's not the right date. Da, 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 da. It was causing a lot more time than we felt was beneficial for the requirement from the Fed as to what you can reimburse. So we took it and then said, okay, we're going to follow DFA's requirements, which DFA then comes and says you get this amount per day, your per diem. And then you have, then they cut it out to where you have the 75% for the first and the last day. And then that's the way we put it. Now, if you go in there and you're doing it differently and you said instead of getting that amount, they only spent $45, that employee is, you can go in there and you can just request us to pay the $45 instead of the whole amount that was spent. That's fine. We don't, I mean, that's not a problem with it. But we were trying to make it simpler for you all and for us on that part of it. But that does not mean that you all cannot have more stricter guidelines for that.
Okay, thank you.
It's on a personal note, it's also trying to prevent, having to do like, an entire email chain over a 95-cent charge, or something like that. And it's just like, okay, no, I'd rather not have to spend hours figuring this out. So it does help us as far as like managing how much it is. We already did this one. Yes, internal controls. All right, so 7, true or false? Only professional development applications are due October 1st. All other applications are due May 1st. Is that true or false? Okay. Oh no. Oh no. It is not true. It is false. There you go. All right, Philip got it. So the reason I put this one in here is because last year it was like this. It was that only the professional development was due October 1st, and that's typically how it's been. But because we've changed it this year about Hoopla, to make sure that y'all have many months that you can apply towards it, we've moved that one back to October 1st as well. Karen has accused Philip of cheating. Well, I encourage cheating. Please look at all of the notes, look at all of the materials, look at everything that you can, and use it whenever you can. All right. I encourage cheating if that's what that means in that context. All right. So when is the deadline for final expenditures for LSTA subgrants? Oh, I like that, Kelly. Librarians don't cheat. We research. Yeah, I like that. All right. Yeah, I'm seeing pretty consistently C's. All right. So this one, it's meant to be a little tricky. Go figure with my questions. May 31st. C. That is whenever that is the final deadline for expenditures. That doesn't mean that you have to have your paperwork into us. There's no form that's whatever. All right. Final reimbursements, yes. Those are due on June 10th. Do y'all know what the June 30th deadline is, or what that date is significant for, given that timeline that we saw earlier? This is one of the new ones. Oh, now y'all don't want to cheat. Okay. So June 30th. There we go. So the Hoopla stop, like the funding for Hoopla goes through that date. All right. So it goes through June 30th. All right. Unlike the other grants, which stop on May 31st. And then August 29th. What's significant about that date? Anybody? Exactly. Final reports. So your final evaluations are due at that time. And that August 29th date, that also applies to this year. So it's just August 29th, 2025. So that would be coming up in a little while. All right. So that's what I've got for you. Do y'all have any questions about anything that we've covered today? I feel y'all were pretty good about like asking the questions as we went through, which is, I encourage that. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Marianne. No, I'll miss y'all too. So, if whenever they send out this presentation, there's the answer key to the questions there at the end. So just in case you forget anything that was in there. Oh, I lost my slide. So yeah, and as always, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions, at least for the next week.